Sir, this area is for paying guests only. The words dropped like ice into the noonday heat. Conversation slowed. A splash echoed from the other side of the pool, but all eyes shifted toward the man on the chaise lounge. He didn't move at first. He lay there, head tilted toward the sun, dark shades hiding his eyes. A half-melted glass of mango tonic beside him. The towel beneath him was monogrammed, fresh from the concierge's private cart. His swim trunks were black, understated, no designer logos, no jewelry, just skin, calm, and stillness. But the voice struck again sharper this time. I said this area is restricted. Are you a guest here? A tall woman in a cream blazer and staff tag stood over him now. Her clipboard gleamed under the sunlight, her lips curled upward, but her ice cold. Rehearsed held no curiosity, only accusation. A few people around the pool adjusted their sunglasses to watch. A blond man in a robe chuckled and muttered, "He probably snuck in from the beach." Someone else said louder, "Here we go again." Still, the man didn't speak. He reached slowly for his drink, took a sip, and finally sat up. His shoulders were broad, posture on both erect, but his jaw had tightened slightly. "Is there a problem?" His voice was smooth, low, precise. The woman cleared her throat. "Yes, sir, you're in a VIP guest area. Unless you can show proof of your suite or reservation, I'll have to ask you to leave." Behind her, a security guard appeared, radio clipped, arms folded. Another splash, another silence. He looked around. Families sunbathing, couples sipping champagne, staff members folding towels with surgical precision. And yet every pair of eyes now locked on him like he was the only ripple in a still pond. He reached into his side bag. A pause. A breath. And then he stopped, fingers just above the zipper, because something inside him whispered, "No, not yet." He looked back at the woman. "And if I say I'm just here to relax?" Her smile vanished. "Then I'll have to call security," she said flatly. "You're making the guests uncomfortable." He let the silence linger, long enough for a child's giggle to pierce through it, long enough for the woman to shift on her heels. He stood up slowly, not in anger but in calculation, the kind of movement that says, "You don't know who you're talking to." But he didn't raise his voice, didn't flash anything, not yet, because sometimes the power isn't in how loud you speak, it's in how long you wait to show your hand. And in that moment, one thing became clear. They had no idea who they'd just tried to humiliate, but that wasn't even the worst part, because what happened next would force the entire resort to stop and rethink everything they thought they knew. Let me take you back to what led to this moment. He hadn't always worn sunglasses this calm. There was a time, not so long ago, when Langston Banks couldn't even afford a motel pool, let alone a luxury resort overlooking the Pacific. He used to watch from construction scaffolds, shirt soaked with sweat, as rich families sunbathed below, laughing with cocktails in hand. He remembered thinking, what must it feel like to be allowed to just exist without being questioned? Now here he was, wealthy, private equity partner, investor in 6 resort properties including this one, and still. They looked at his skin before they looked at his name. The security guard stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your room key now." Langston turned toward him slowly. He was taller than most, posture straight, but the silence he held, that was what made people nervous. He didn't reach for anything. Not his wallet, not his bag, just held the guard's stare. "I'm not showing you anything until you tell me why you approached me and not the other 6 guests who've been sitting here longer than I have." The guard hesitated. "We received a complaint." Langston tilted his head. "Oh, from whom?" The woman in the cream blazer stiffened. "That's confidential, sir." A couple on the lounge to seats down whispered behind their wine glasses. The man chuckled. "He's making it worse." Langston heard it. Of course he did. He heard everything. And still he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he leaned back slightly and asked the question that flipped something in the air. "Tell me, what exactly do you think I'm doing here?" Nobody answered, because the answer would have revealed everything. the assumptions, the prejudice, the quiet policy to always challenge some guests more than others. The security guard's fingers tapped the side of his radio. "Do you want us to call the front desk to confirm, sir?" Langston smiled faintly, not warm, not amused, just enough to say, "You're about to make a very expensive mistake." Still, he didn't pull out the card, not yet, because part of him wanted to see how far they'd go. That's when a waiter appeared, young, nervous, tray in hand. He leaned toward Langston and said, barely above a whisper, "Sir, I think I know who you are. Should I get the director?" Langston paused. Finally, someone recognized him. He nodded once, no words. The waiter spun around and disappeared through the sliding glass doors behind the bar. But across the pool, the murmurs were growing louder. Phones out now. Someone had started live streaming. A thumbnail titled "Black Man Harassed at 5-Star Resort" was already climbing TikTok. And still no one knew the full story. Yet, because in the next few minutes, someone would walk onto the pool deck and say for words that made everyone freeze. Stick around, because what she said would turn silence into spectacle and flip the whole resort upside down. The glass doors slid open with a hush. A woman in a navy sheath dress stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the stone tiles. She wasn't rushing, but there was a tension in her walk, a pause in her breath. She scanned the crowd, then locked eyes with the waiter who had summoned her. He whispered something. Her expression didn't change. Then she looked toward Langston. For a long second, no one moved. Not the security guard, not the woman in the cream blazer, not even Langston himself. Phones were up now, everywhere. Streams titled "Racist Resort Incident" had crossed to OK Live viewers in under 5 minutes. Comments flooded the feed. "He's too calm. I bet he owns the place. This is giving hidden billionaire energy. Please let this be a plot twist." The woman in the navy dress approached the cluster of staff. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice low but edged. The woman in the blazer straightened. "We were addressing a possible trespasser." He couldn't show proof of his reservation. The director's eyes flicked to Langston, then to the guard, then back. Langston didn't speak. He simply raised an eyebrow, letting the silence speak for itself. The director took a breath. "Name, sir?" He reached into his bag. The movement was slow, deliberate, and when his hand emerged, he wasn't holding a card. He was holding nothing. Instead, he looked the director in the eye and said, "You already know who I am, or you should." The director froze. It clicked. A flicker of recognition danced behind her lashes. Her jaw shifted, and just as her lips parted to speak, the woman in the cream blazer cut in. "We don't have time for games," she snapped. "Sir, this is private property, and unless you can prove you belong." Langston turned to her. For the first time, really turned. He took one step forward. "You just made two assumptions. One about my room, the other about my right to be here." The woman opened her mouth, but he cut her off. "No, let me finish." Her arms crossed. Langston looked around. "You asked if I had a key. I don't." He paused. "Because I don't stay here." He let the sentence hang. "I own here." A hush fell so suddenly it felt like the air had thickened. But before anyone could speak, before the livid streams could erupt, the woman in cream scoffed. "Anyone can say that. That doesn't mean anything." And then she said it, loud in front of everyone. "You people always act like you're above the rules." The director's eyes widened. Someone gasped audibly. A phone nearly slipped from a hand. Langston didn't flinch, but inside, something burned. He'd heard that line before, years ago, at a bus station, at a boardroom, at a hotel lobby in Atlanta. "You people," it always meant the same thing. It always sounded the same, no matter how pretty the accent. He looked at the director now, calm, controlled. "Would you like to see my credentials now?" he asked softly. Her voice caught. Yes, I would." Langston reached into the bag again, but this time, he didn't pull out just a card. He pulled out a black leather folio. Inside were documents that would stop every whisper cold. "Before I tell you what," she read aloud in front of the entire pool, "I know you might be busy, Maybe you've got errands to run, or maybe your mind can only handle so much drama at once. But if stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss how it all unfolds. The leather folio opened with a subtle flick, quiet enough that only those closest heard it. Yet somehow it cut through the air thicker than tension. Langston's fingers moved with a kind of precision that doesn't beg attention but commands it. Inside, tucked between smooth dividers, were 3 crisp documents. He pulled out the top sheet, turned it gently toward the director, and held it up between the fingers like a magician showing his final card. Her eyes flicked to Iten stilled. The page bore a platinum ink header, Banks Capital Holdings. Beneath it, Equity Partner Pacific Crown Resort Group, and centered. Bold serif font, Langston Elias Banks. She blinked once, then again. He handed her the rest signed ownership papers, board memos, and a copy of the founding investor contract for the very resort they stood in. By the 3rd line of the 2nd page, her breath caught. "This isn't just confirmation," she murmured, forgetting for a moment that dozens of eyes were still watching. "You're on the ownership council." That sentence alone shifted the air. Not metaphorically, literally. Like everyone around the pool had inhaled at once and didn't dare exhale. The clinking of glass stopped, lounge chairs stopped creaking. Someone behind the bar froze mid-shake on a cocktail. And then the silence fractured. Whispers snapped into motion like a match struck dry. "Oh my God. No way. He owns this." The security guard's posture faltered, one foot stepping subtly back. His hand moved away from his radio. Meanwhile, the woman in the cream blazer stood like a statue flished, blinking hard, but saying nothing. Langston didn't look at her. Not yet. Instead, he turned to the director. "Now, do you understand why I wasn't in a hurry to pull out a key card?" The director nodded slowly. "Mr. Bankside." He raised a hand. "I'm not interested in apologies," he said, voice level. "I'm interested in accountability." Now he turned, face to face with the woman in cream. "You assumed," he said, calm as marble, "that someone like me couldn't belong here. You spoke down to me, twice. Once to flex authority, and once to insult my existence." Her lips trembled, but no words came. And that's when he stepped forward, not to threaten, not to gloat, but just far enough that she could no longer pretend he wasn't real. "You said people like me." The phrase hung between them, sharp as glass. "I wonder how many others you said that Toho didn't have documents to stop you. Who didn't have a name you were afraid of?" A phone somewhere dinged with a comment notification. Langston's eyes never left hers. "Today, you picked the wrong man to underestimate." He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just stood there, absolutely still, while the entire weight of her mistake came crashing down around her, like invisible glass shattering. No one clapped. No one needed to, because the sound of realization rippling through the crowd was louder than any applause. The director, still holding the documents, slowly lowered them, her voice barely audible. "I'll handle this immediately." But Langston wasn't finished, because this wasn't about one employee or one moment. This was about the pattern, the quiet permission that systems like this gave people like her. And if no one ever pulled the thread, the whole thing would keep weaving itself over new victims. He took one step back, reached for his drink on the lounge chair. The ice had melted, but his resolve had not. What he would do next wasn't personal. It was structural. Langston sat back down, not out of surrender, but out of control. He crossed one leg over the other, retrieved his sunglasses from the edge of the lounge, and slid them on. The reflection in his lenses showed the cluster of shaken staff, the stiff director, and a resort full of guests now pretending not to watch but failing miserably. He reached into his bag again. This time, it wasn't for documents. It was for his phone. He tapped once, scrolled, then held it to his ear. "Carla," he said calmly, "get me direct access to the Pacific Crown Internal Ops dashboard." A pause, then a clip response on the other end. "Right away, Mr. Banks." He didn't explain, didn't fill the silence. He let everyone standing around him wonder what the hell Internal Ops dashboard meant. The director cleared her throat. Mr. Banks, if there's anything I can do to, you can wait. Her mouth snapped shut. He continued, and while you're at it, you might want to pull up the employee roster for today's shift. Full front of house staff. I'll be requesting review privileges in approximately 30 seconds. That sentence hit like a small earthquake. The woman in the cream blazer looked as if she might throw up. The security guard had taken the full steps away from her. A waiter accidentally dropped a spoon. It echoed far too loudly. Langston's voice remained even, but there was something surgical behind it now. Each syllable felt measured, like a blade slicing without blood. Too often, he said without looking at them, people think public shame is enough. But a lesson that fades in a week isn't a lesson. Carla's voice returned through the speaker. You have full override now, sir. System sensing across your device. He nodded once. Thank you. He opened a secure portal. His thumbprint unlocked layers of access. Every department, every complaint ever filed, every guest interaction logged and timestamped. And there it was, today's entries, flagged, non-compliant guest behavior poolside. He tapped it. The report had already been started by the same woman now standing 10 feet from him. It was full of vague language. Individual failed to present credentials. Guest was disruptive to staff protocol. Langston scrolled slowly, then turned the screen toward the director. Would you like to confirm who authored this? She read it, nodded grimly. Yes, that's her ID code. Langston turned the phone back toward himself. Then let's attach this incident to her formal HR record. Note, initiated removal of equity partner without verification. Demonstrated bias in guest assessment, escalated incident unnecessarily. He hit send. It sensed there was no need for raised voices, no threats. Just systems doing what they were designed to do, and you were the one who built them. The woman finally spoke, her voice cracking. Mr. Banks, didn't know. That, he said without looking at her, is the problem. He set the phone down beside his drink, and in that moment, something shifted. Not just in her expression, but in the entire pool deck. The silence wasn't stunned anymore. It was respectful, a sort of reverent, uncomfortable stillness that happens when people realize the world just recalibrated around one man. Langston leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees. I'm not here to punish, he said quietly, but I'm also not here to let this slide. The director nodded quickly. We'll start immediate disciplinary. No, Langston cut in, not discipline. He looked her directly in the eye. Reform. She blinked. Excuse me. Langston stood once more, taller than before. Or maybe he just felt taller now, because no one looked down on him anymore. You don't fix a system by slapping wrists. You fix it by changing what it rewards, what it tolerates, what it ignores. The director's throat moved, swallowing something thick. She didn't argue, because something about the way he said it made it clear. The conversation was about to get much, much bigger. Langston didn't pace. He didn't need to. He stood perfectly still, letting the weight of the moment settle into every tile around the pool. The luxury had turned quiet, the kind of quiet you get not from peace but from realization, from power shifting in real time. The director finally broke the silence. We'll begin rewriting the guest interaction protocols immediately. I'll ensure every manager. Not enough. His words stopped her mid-sentence. Langston's voice didn't rise, but it pressed deeper now, like water finding cracks in a foundation. This isn't about guest interaction protocols, he said. This is about the default assumptions your staff make the moment someone doesn't look like their idea of a guest. He took a step forward. I want mandatory bias training, not the cheap slideshow kind. I want paid hours, certified facilitators, and not just for the frontline executives included. The director nodded slowly. Of course. I also want a complete audit of how guest complaints are prioritized. I want the complaint escalation policy written so that staff don't treat a call from a nervous bystander as gospel, especially when it's rooted in profiling. Her lips parted to respond, but he wasn't done. Lastly, he said, his tone now quiet, almost reflective. I want a platform created for guests who've had experiences like this to report them directly, bypassing the front desk, straight to the executive team. The air around them stilled again. It was no longer a conversation. It was a command. Langston wasn't angry, but he was finished tolerating. He turned toward the pool, scanning the surface of the water no eerily calm. He could still hear the soft chime of wind playing against wine glasses, the gentle lap of ripples against the tiled edge. And in that calm, a memory returned. He'd been 19. He and his best friend saved up for 6 months to spend a weekend in Miami. They stayed in a 2-star hotel, walked 15 blocks just to see a beachfront resort they couldn't afford. They stood at the entrance, dreaming. Then a man in a white polo and earpiece had stepped between them and said, "This place isn't for you. Move along." No explanation, no check, just assumption. Just a voice that said, "You don't belong here." And now, that voice stood in front of him again, but this time, it was wearing a blazer and holding a clipboard. Langston turned back. The director seemed smaller now, not out of weakness but because the scale of what stood before her had changed. He walked over to the table beside his chair, took a sip of his now lukewarm drink, then reached again for his phone. "Carla," he said, "draft a statement." Pause. Subject line: leadership, bias, and institutional responsibility. Another pause. "Yeah, for the public. But send it to the board first." He didn't look at the director as he spoke, because this wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't even about the resort. It was about setting a precedent, about drawing a line in marble and saying, no more hiding behind politeness while systems stay poisoned. He hung up, then finally looked back at the people who had tried to remove him from his own space, and said, with devastating calm, "This won't stay in the shadows." Then he sat down, back in the same chair they tried to pull him from. But this time no one dared to move. The email went out within the hour. It started as a board-wide internal memo subject line, exactly as he said: leadership, bias, and institutional responsibility. But by sunset, it was no longer internal. The message had leaked, and not by accident. Langston didn't flinch when he saw the headline appear on a hospitality blog an hour later. "Investor shuts down racist incident at luxury resort." Read his full statement. Then the repost came. By midnight, a digital PR account with 1.2 million followers had the entire memo in a carousel. By morning, so did Forbes. It wasn't angry. It wasn't reactive. It was scalpel precise. In the memo, Langston laid out the incident without naming the woman involved. He described the assumptions, the sequence, the silence from other guests. He called out the comfort of quiet complicity, and wrote a single line that punched harder than any insult. "The moment I was challenged had nothing to do with rules. It had everything to do with who they expected not to be in power." The post ended with action, a public pledge from Langston to audit and reform every hospitality brand in his portfolio starting immediately. He even offered third-party training to partners at no cost. But he was clear: those who refuse will not keep my investment. That line landed like a meteor in corporate circles. Emails flew. Boardrooms scrambled. Several high-level managers in parallel resorts began whispering about updating their own bias protocols. And in the comments, thousands. Stories from Black, brown, immigrant, queer, and working-class guests with variations of the same moment. That look from staff. That moment of doubt. That shadow of rejection even while paying full price. Langston wasn't watching for applause, but he saw it coming anyway. By noon the next day, a fellow investor posted a story on Instagram. "Been silent too long. Proud to stand with Langston. Change overdue." A ripple, then another. But back at the pool's place where it had all happened, that shift was slower, quieter, awkward. The same guests who had smirked into their sunglasses 24 hours ago now avoided his gaze. Some nodded, some looked guilty, and some would still pretend they hadn't seen a thing. But they had, and he knew it. They had seen him questioned, humiliated, tested, and when they could have said something most didn't. One young man, maybe mid-20s, finally walked up with shaking hands. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't speak up yesterday. I should have." Langston didn't scold. He just looked him in the eye. "That moment," he said, "wasn't about your voice. It was about what you were willing to ignore." The man swallowed hard, nodded, and walked away. Around them, the luxury kept spinning, servers adjusting umbrellas, spa staff offering cold towels. But something under the surface had cracked. Respect had replaced spectacle, and unease had replaced silence. Because now, everyone who had watched had to ask themselves why they watched at all. He hadn't slept well, even with the finest sheets, the climate-controlled suite, and blackout blinds. Langston lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, hands folded on his chest like armor. It wasn't the confrontation that kept replaying in his mind. It was the silence after. He remembered too many rooms like that, not luxury suites but waiting rooms, back entrances, employee lounges, interview chairs that always seemed 1 inch lower than the desk in front of them. He remembered being 16, walking into a bookstore with a friend, and having the clerk follow him for 3 aisles, then whisper into a walkie-talkie, "Keep an eye on the tall one." He remembered applying for his first business loan and being asked twice, "Are you sure you understand what a line of credit is?" He remembered stepping onto a first-class flight and having the attendant gesture him toward economy before he even handed over the ticket. And he remembered not fighting it. Not then, because you can't argue with people who've already decided your role in the scene. You just play it quietly or leave. The next morning, as Langston sat at the same poolside lounge chair, a crisp breeze tugged at the corner of his linen shirt. The sky was flawless, the water still. But inside, he wasn't. A family walked by with parents and a son, maybe 8 or 9. The boy glanced at Langston, then at his father, and whispered something. The father nodded once. Then they walked over. "Hi there," the man said, hesitantly. "My son just wanted to meet you." Langston looked up, surprised. The boy stepped forward. "Are you the man from the phone?" Langston smiled faintly. "Which phone?" "The one everyone's talking about. Who changed the rules?" The words hit harder than expected. Langston nodded slowly. "Maybe." The boy grinned, then held out his hand. Langston shook it. As they left, the father said quietly, "Thanks for showing him what it means to push back." Langston nodded, but didn't answer. Because part of him didn't feel heroic. Part of him still felt tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying invisible weight for so long. Your shoulders forget how to rest. He looked out over the pool again. The surface sparkled, almost too perfect. But he knew that beneath it was pressure recurrents, filters, machinery humming out of sight to keep the illusion intact. It reminded him of everything he'd built. From the outside, it shimmered. But underneath years of grind, of humiliation swallowed and converted into drive. He thought, what if I didn't have to convert it anymore? What if success didn't have to be revenge? What if presence didn't have to be a protest? What if just Ansi could walk into a place and not brace for impact? He sipped his drink. The citrus was sharp, clean, and still, it didn't erase the taste in his mouth. Somewhere behind him, to guess whispered, he caught one phrase, "That's him." But they didn't approach, didn't ask questions, just stared. Langston didn't turn around. He just watched the water. It sparkled under the sun like 1,000 answers he'd never get. The boardroom was glass-walled and sunlit, perched above the marina like a luxury aquarium. Outside, yachts glided silently through turquoise water. Inside, tension rippled louder than the sea. Langston sat at the head of the table. Not by chance, not by rotation, by right. The meeting had been hastily arranged in urgent executive sync with regional partners, senior directors, and the silent investors patched in remotely. The air smelled like espresso and nerves. AVP of Operations cleared his throat first. "With all due respect, Langston, the message is strong made to strong. We've already had 3 travel blogs pick it up. if we reframe this as an isolated incident. Langston didn't blink. So you want to manage perception instead of fixing the problem? The VP looked down. Another partner leaned in. Our concern is precedent. If we empower every guest to bypass staff with complaints, what message does that send? Where's the line? Langston tapped the table once, slowly. You're worried about the wrong line, he said. You should be asking where the line was when your staff thought kicking out a black man for looking out of place was normal. Silence. A woman near the end of the table adjusted her pearl earrings but said nothing. Langston remembered her from a dinner 2 years ago. She'd smiled at him, politely, the way someone might smile at a competent valet. He looked at her no and didn't smile back. I'm not here to win everyone's comfort, he continued. I'm here to make this company look in the mirror. The CFO, who hadn't spoken until now, leaned forward. Langston, let's talk stakes. Are you suggesting this become policy across all properties? Yes. And if the board declines? Langston met his eyes. Then Banks Capital pulls every dollar from the group. The room tensed. One man whispered, Jesus. Langston's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I don't bluff, he said. You all know that. He leaned back, gaze sweeping the room. I've been in meetings like this before, he said. Meetings where the room got quiet when someone brought up race, where silence was the only answer because no one wanted to make it political. He paused, letting the weight of it land. I used to stay quiet in those moments, smile, pivot, because I thought tolerance would buy me credibility. He leaned forward again, but silence doesn't buy credibility. It just sells your dignity at a discount. The room fell still. Some stared at the table, others at him. The woman with the pearls looked directly at him now, not out of defiance, but out of something slower, heavier. Recognition. Langston stood. I'm giving you the blueprint, he said. You don't have to design anything. Just decide whether you want to be a brand that changes the conversation, or a brand that gets left behind. He didn't slam the door when he left, but it felt like thunder anyway. The headlines kept coming, but Langston didn't chase them. He declined every interview request. No CNN, no MSNBC, no podcast circuits. He didn't need to explain what had already played out in real time, with 1,000 phones filming and 1,000,000 eyes watching. Instead, he focused on the ripples. 3 resort partners submitted revised training proposals within a week. 2 included videos of upper management issuing public apologies to guests and staff alike. Not press polished, just human. One CEO wrote, I didn't see it until you made me. I won't unsee it now. Langston didn't reply to that email. He didn't need to. Instead, he sat in a small cafe just off the Marinado Luxury. No staff waiting with pressed towels, just a chipped ceramic mug and sunlight through striped awnings. Across from him sat a young man in his early 20s, nervous, hair too short from a recent shave. Hands clutched a cap like a lifeline. I used to work at one of your properties, the young man said. Got let go for guest discomfort. I wore a hoodie to my shift one time. Langston didn't interrupt. They told me I looked unapproachable, said I made the lobby feel less safe. His voice cracked on that word. Safe? Langston nodded slowly. The young man reached into his backpack, pulled out a folded sheath of extermination paperwork. He slid it across the table like a confession. I didn't know who you were until all this started. But when I saw the video, he swallowed hard. I realized I wasn't crazy. Langston looked down at the paper, then folded it back. You're not. He didn't offer a job. Not yet. He offered something rare. Belief. Sometimes that was heavier than a contract. They spoke for another 20 minutes about systems, silence, and the quiet suffocation of being seen as a threat before being seen as a person. Before they parted, Langston asked, why did you reach out? The young man shrugged, embarrassed. I guess I thought maybe if you knew someone like me existed, it'd matter more. Langston looked him in the eye. You matter already, but now they know you do, too. They shook hands, and as the young man walked away head higher, then when he or Langston sat still in the hum of the cafe, stirred not by caffeine, but by clarity. It was never just about boardrooms, or beachfronts, or even equity portfolios. It was about the spaces that didn't have cameras, the stories that never got told because no one filmed the moment it broke someone quietly. The real change wouldn't come from statements. It would come from the day someone like that young man walked into a lobby and was simply let in. No questions, no looks, just a welcome. Langston looked out the window, watched the breeze move through hanging ferns. Maybe that's where the work really started. Not where the spotlight shined, but where no one was looking at all. The invitation didn't go through PR. No poster campaigns, no elegant typography or curated guest lists. Just a plain subject line. You're invited to listen. Langston hosted it at the very same resource and glass hall. Same manicured courtyard that had once turned into a stage for humiliation. But this time, there were no cameras, no news crews. Just chairs, arranged in a wide, imperfect circle. There was no podium, no keynote, no VIP section. Just people, staff members, former staff, interns, middle managers, 2 former security guards, 3 housekeepers, a barista who had quit after being reprimanded for overstepping when she corrected a customer's racial slur. Langston sat in a chair just like the others, not in the center, not flanked by handlers. He came alone. For the first 10 minutes, no one spoke. The air was filled only with the shuffle of feet and the clink of water glasses. A nervous cough here, a shifting chair there. Then, an older woman cleared her throat. She wore a crisp, faded uniform and orthopedic shoes. Her ID badge still clipped neatly to her blouse, though no one had asked for it. I used to clean the South Wing bathrooms, she said, every day, even Sundays. She didn't stand, just spoke softly into the room. One time, I found a crying teenager in one of the stalls. She was in uniform. Said she got sent home for having braids. Said it wasn't on brand. A few heads dropped. I tried to tell the supervisor. The woman continued. Said it didn't seem right. He told me to mind my mopping. A sharp breath escaped someone across the circle. I remember thinking she paused, eyes glistening. If even my silence didn't protect her, then what was it really for? She folded her hands. Langston didn't speak, not because he didn't know what to say, but because, for once, he knew silence could hold more weight than words. Another voice joined in, a man in valet black, barely 30, talking about how he learned to keep his voice down over the years. Smiling too big made me look unprofessional. Talking too loud made me look aggressive. A third voice, from the back, I got passed over twice, was told I was too urban for the front desk. No one interrupted. No one defended. Langston sat through every account like he was hearing them for the first time, because in some ways, he was. This wasn't about validation. It was about inventory, of pain, of patterns, of a system that too often blamed its fractures on the people it dropped. Near the end, the older woman looked at Langston again, accusing, not pleading, just searching. I never thought someone who looked like me would sit at that table, she said quietly. Langston didn't answer. He just nodded once, and let that nod carry everything. Regret, respect, and responsibility. For the first time in a long time, the room didn't want a speech. It wanted quiet, and Langston gave it. It didn't happen overnight. Change never does. But over the next 6 months, the resort stopped pretending it was just a vacation destination. It became something else quietly, steadily, not because of press, not because of pressure, because the foundation had shifted. A new guest feedback protocol launched at Ananias, direct to board, with a team trained to analyze bias patterns and complaint trends. 3 new hires joined HR, all with backgrounds in equity consulting. The lobby art changed to no longer the bland neutrality of beige ocean scenes, but curated pieces by artists whose names weren't printed for comfort, but for presence. Training wasn't just slides now, it was stories. Guest interactions started with eye contact, not assumptions. Front desk staff were given power to override flagging algorithms. If the system misidentified unusual behavior that was, in reality, just cultural difference. And the woman in the cream blazer? She wasn't fired. Langston had made the choice deliberately. Instead, she was re-signeto internal audit under supervision. She didn't like it at first, but something shifted after the third week. After hearing 5 separate employees tell her they'd been afraid of her clipboard. Sometimes accountability doesn't roar. Sometimes it just lingers until it humbles you. As for Langston, he stepped away. Didn't do a media tour. Didn't publish a book. Didn't sell merch with slogans about equity. He let the system change without him at the front of it. Because true power isn't presence, it's legacy. One bright morning, months after the storm had passed, Langston returned to the resort. No escort, no meeting, just a towel and a linen shirt. He walked out to the pool, see death, same path, the same sunlight, the same tile beneath his feet. But this time no one stopped him. No security glanced his way. No clipboard blocked his view. No woman in beige narrowed her eyes to assess his worth. He passed a group of guests lounging, chatting. One looked up, recognized him but didn't say anything. Not because they didn't care, but because nothing about his presence felt out of place anymore. Langston found the same chair, the one he'd been told wasn't his. He sat, not to make a point, not to provoke, just to sit. A young attendant approached, no older than 20. He smelled a genuine, easy. "Can I get you anything, sir?" Langston looked up, saw no hesitation in the kid's eyes. "Just hospitality." "No, thank you," he said. The attendant nodded. "You just let me know." He walked away. Langston leaned back, exhaled. The breeze moved through the palm trees like a memory that didn't hurt anymore. He reached for his sunglasses, placed them on slowly, and let the sun warm his face. The chair no longer held the weight of defiance. It held something else now. Belonging. Not earned. Not justified. Just there. And for the first time in years, Langston Banks didn't have to prove a damn thing.